I'm so grateful for the opportunity of you being here. It's wonderful that we can do this, and let me kind of walk through a little bit about the relationships, because what it is that I want to talk about to you this morning in this first session is all about relationships. The work of development is all about relationships. So it has little to do with money. You're saying, well, yeah, money is really important, and it is important, and it's obviously going to be something that we're going to be involved in. But it also has little to do with what you have to say. A lot of things we have to say, are important, and yet sometimes we don't have the kind of impact that we really want to have. And so what I want to do is, as quickly as possible, is to share some thoughts that I think might be important to all of us. First of all, what I'd like you to do before we talk about this slide is I'd like you to think about your best friend. Everybody's got a best friend, somebody perhaps that you've known for years of your life. I've got a pal of mine that for the last 30, 40 years, we have worked together on projects. We probably talk to each other maybe once a week, or certainly once every other week or so. He's been my best friend for all of those years. And I think you probably have a best friend as well. It may be your spouse. It may be someone that you've known all of your life. But when you think about a relationship, there are certain words that come to mind, I suspect. And I wish we had the opportunity of being able to interact a little bit more. But the realities are, when I think about relationships, I think about, the enjoyment of just being a friend. It's always fun to call somebody and just find out what's going on in their lives. And I suspect that you've had that opportunity as well. We have shared interests, and I think you probably have shared interests as well with your friends that you have and that you've known for many a year. Those things are important. It's a safe relationship. In other words, I can go to my friend in any kind of situation, and I may be frustrated. I may be just despondent, perhaps, in some form of way, as I'm not really getting done what it is that I really want to get done, or whatever the case might be. But I know I can come in any situation, and I know I'm going to be received, and I'm going to have the opportunity of just really getting some support from my friends. It's an enjoyable relationship. It's an involved relationship. It's a comfortable relationship. Those are all words that we use to talk about relationships. But I'd like to ask you to think about a question: who benefits from a relationship? And when you get down to that, who benefits from a relationship is the people that are involved in it. And when you think about who's benefits from a relationship, everybody does, don't they? We all benefit from a relationship. And if we're not benefiting from the relationship, the realities are we probably don't have a relationship. We have, in many instances in the world of development, a lot of people that are basically involved in terms of the organization. And as long as they produce what it is that we want them to produce, then the realities are, we call that a relationship. But it's not a relationship if it's not reciprocal. And so there's a lot of organizations, a lot of things that happen in the world of development where people, essentially, as long as you perform, then everything's going to be okay. But if you don't perform the way we want you to perform, then the realities are it's not going to be okay. And that's not a relationship. That's an arrangement. And in the world of development, there's a lot of arrangements that take place. If you do this, then this is going to be okay. But if you don't do this, you may never hear from us again. And that's not what we mean to do in the world of development relationships. So thinking about these words that I give for the definition of development, I went back to the earlier, the definition of development. Development represents, in my definition, the things we do to build rational relationships with others. In other words, those two operative words are the important words of this particular context. So let's talk about the difference between rational and relationships. We all can relate to the idea of relationships. We've talked about that and how valuable they are and how important they are to our health and the opportunities that we do to serve God. But the definition relates to a certain quality of relationships, and that's what I call rational relationships. In other words, these relationships are substantive. They really hold on to something. They mean something. And so when I think of relationships, I'm thinking about relationships that I've had, or rational relationships that I've had with people for 30 and 40 and 50 years. And these relationships are very, very deep. They grow into great opportunities for us to be able to serve and to do the things that we do. Now, moving forward quickly, in the world of relationships, and this is important because we all know about relationships. We talk about them a lot, don't we? But in the world of relationships, it's emotion that brings us together, but it's rationalism that keeps us together. Now stop and think about that for a moment. Every relationship that you've ever been involved in, whether it's been with your falling in love with your spouse, you know, it was emotion that brought us together. We saw this person. I remember seeing Sue for the first time. I can tell you where she was standing. I can tell you everything about her. And the realities are there was something that happened. There was something that I began to understand about her. She was witty. She was smart. She was, I mean, everything about it. It was all emotion. And we all can realize that. But it's rationalism that keeps us together. We've been married now together for decades. And the realities are that relationship is still emotional, but the realities are it's much deeper than it was when we started. In other words, we know each other. We can kind of finish each other's sentences and all the other things that basically are an important part of what it is that make a relationship really, really meaningful. So keep that in the back of your mind because you're going to be working and developing relationships with people. And understand that it's going to be emotion that's going to bring you people, new people to you and going to bring you together. But it's going to be rationalism that are going to keep us there and we have sustained relationships over time. But the good news is this, and there is good news. And the good news is the wonderful thing about the work of development is that it's easy. Now, you're probably sitting there saying, Jerry, you know, thank you very much. But, you know, it's really not easy. I mean, the realities are that it's really pretty tough. And I find it difficult to be able to even do what it is that you're talking about. But the realities are, it's easy because you already have experience. Now you're really getting a bit exasperated with me or whatever. But the realities are, you know, it's easy. This isn't hard because you have experience. And you know why? You know the reason why you have experience? Because you have fallen in love before. All of us have experienced falling in love, haven't we? And if you understand the fact of how you fell in love with your spouse, then the realities are you know what development is all about. All right, this is one of my favorite continuums. I'm a big guy on continuums. I mean, I always like draw lines. I mean, I'm a very visual person. I like to see things. I have to kind of pick them all out together. So I'm going to share with you an illustration. Now, I want you to see up in the upper left-hand corner, that's Sue, by the way. That's the girl that I eventually fell in love with. You know, interestingly enough, we had a lot of differences. I mean, she grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in the state of Maine. My father was a fisherman. Her father was a factory worker. We lived 1,200 miles away. We didn't know each other. There was a period of time when the person you fell in love with, there was a time then you didn't even know who they were. And you all can relate to that. Well, there's Sue, and there underneath Sue is me, and that's Jerry. And we didn't know each other at all. I mean, in other words, we just, you know, came along together somewhere. My sister actually was the person that kind of set this thing all up, but she had a invitation to come to her house, and she recommended Sue to come to the house, and then she didn't tell me, but I was supposed to come to the house at the same time. And so there I am, and I'm seeing Sue for the very first time. And you can remember that event in your life. I'm sure you can, at least in most instances. But all of a sudden I'm looking at Sue and I'm talking about her and I'm thinking, wow, maybe my sister really is pretty wiser than I thought she was. I mean, this was a beautiful gal. She was smart. She was witty. It was really quite an interesting experience. For the very first time, I realized that this was really something different than anything that I'd ever experienced in a relationship. And so at the end of the night that night, you know, we were at her house and I said, well, listen, I'm going to be in town tomorrow. Maybe we could get together and go out for dinner tomorrow. Would you be available? And she said, yes. Now, yes is a good word in development. No is not a good word by and large. But when she said yes, I'm thinking, well, this is really good. Maybe this could be an opportunity for me to really get to know her and really understand her a little bit better. So on the first date, what do you do on the first date if you're doing it the way we do it in America? On the first date, we just talk about you know, what it is that's important to us. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about your opportunities, the vision that you have for your organization or for yourself and so forth. And so we have this wonderful conversation that night. It was just really enjoyable. We talked and laughed a little bit about our lives and the things that had happened before in these relationships that we've sought to engage in. But at the end of that evening, that night, I said, well, listen, what are you doing tomorrow night? And she said, well, I'm not doing anything tomorrow night. And I said, well, why don't we get together again? And so we went together on a second date. The first time, remember the exposure opportunity, the first date, and then there was the second date. And the second date, we went a little bit deeper into the relationship only by virtue of the fact that, you know, what's important to you and all those kinds of other things. Now, you know, and it went on. Each one of these little steps basically indicates an encounter that we had with one another. But the realities are we were growing in our understanding of one another, okay? But right in the middle, you see the brackets in the middle. Initially, when Sue and I were talking, you know, the pronouns were predominantly I and me. I was trying to convince her that I was really a pretty good deal. You know, you really need to look at me because I think I could really be a good husband for you, or whatever the case might be. And we weren't saying it that bluntly, obviously, but obviously I was wanting to make sure that I could communicate well to her so that she would listen to what it is that I had to say. And the realities are she was doing the same thing. And so it was just I and me. And that was the pronouns that basically defined our relationship up to that particular point where you see the bracket. And you see the bracket right in the middle. And something happened right in the middle. And it happens differently in all of our situations, perhaps. But in our situation, it was really, you know, pretty interesting. Here we are at a restaurant. We're having a lovely meal, and I'm talking, and she's talking, and we're laughing, and we're just enjoying one another. And then the entree was finished. We were ordered a dessert. And I'm sitting there and I'm kind of being really, you know, somewhat reluctant. I'm a little bit afraid. And she's looking at me. She says, now, Jerry, are you okay? And I said, well, yeah, I'm okay. And so we talk a little bit longer. And she says, are you sure you're all right? And I said, yeah, I'm okay, and so forth. And eventually I got the boldness to say something. And I said, you know, what if we were to take this to the next level? And you know what she meant. Because, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we were just enjoying, you know, these early years of just kind of growing in our relationship with one another. But now we're taking it to a totally different level. And we're saying, what if we, notice the change in pronouns, what if we were to take this to the next level? And she knew what it is that I was saying, and you probably understood it as well, because she understood, you know, that this is different now, that this is a relationship that goes much, much deeper and has many more consequences than what it is that we've talked to in the past. And so that's when everything changes. And it's the same thing when you're working with individuals. There's a lot of stuff that happens at the front end, but then you want to provide people the opportunity, if in fact they have a desire to move forward, to give them the opportunity to join with us in what it is that we're doing. Now, you can see all the little lines that happened afterwards. And in that little diamond in the middle, that was the time when we stood in front of a pastor. And we said, for richer, for poorer, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I mean, this was the biggest commitment that I've ever made in my life. And that's the way it happened. Now, to the point that I was talking, I mean, that first part of the continuum was what we call, if you're talking about it developmentally, it's acquisition. I was really seeking to acquire someone that I could spend the rest of my life and serve God together with her in a relationship. And that was something that all of us can relate to. And it's actually the very same thing that happens when you're building a relationship with someone that basically is going to be a part of, that you really long to be a part of your organization. Now, after we shared our vows, we went on our honeymoon, and then there's like 2 or 3 options that can take place here. I mean, obviously the one is that, okay, now I'm married, and now I've got to get a job. I've got to you know, provide for a family, if in fact we have a family, and all those other things. And so if you look at that one section where it's going up, it's basically Jerry's doing his thing. You know, now he's a married man and he's going to have to, you know, basically grow an organization and do whatever he needs to do in order to be able to sustain the needs of a husband. And Sue might have gone the same way. She could have gone downwards and she said, okay, well, this is over, this is over, this is over. And so now we're going to be doing these things. She's going to work this, that, and the other thing. And somehow, you know, oftentimes in relationships, they begin to deteriorate just a little bit, because all of a sudden, all the energy that we were putting into the relationship on the back end, we weren't putting the same level of energy in growing the organization. Now, the realities are you want that process to continue to move forward under the involvement of God in our relationships and with our love for one another. And so that's why I was talking about CIA, because we wanted to communicate better, because we kind of lost communication. I mean, in other words, we'd stay at a restaurant and we'd stay there until like 11 o'clock until someone says, would you please go home? Because the realities are we've got some other, you know, we need to close up so that we can open it up the next morning. And so we'd walk out and we'd sit in the car and we'd talk for another 25 minutes. But now, you know, after the fact of the marriage, now I come home and I'm exhausted and I just sit down and I watch television, or I do this, that, and the other thing. And all the energy that I was putting into securing that relationship we were losing something. And that's why we need to basically grow. And this is the difference between Billy Graham on this AID side. Don't worry about that right now. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But we were spending all of that time and energy in doing what it is that we wanted to do in order to be able to secure the gal that we really wanted to be a part of, or I wanted to be a part of. But we didn't spend, at least initially, the same level of energy to sustain that relationship. And we had to work like that, as well as all of you who have been married and have experienced that relationship. You had to work hard at it as well. And when we spend both parts, you know, distinctively working hard to create and develop those, then we're going to be successful.